But today, I'm going to be interviewing a professor. He's a professor and an author. He actually wrote this incredible book called A Nation Under Our Feet. No big deal, it won the Pulitzer Prize. I don't know if you guys know, winning the Pulitzer Prize in history is pretty hard. But he won for this book. He actually also has his newest book here as well. So we'll be talking about these. But I want to welcome to the stage, without further ado, please welcome Professor Stephen Hahn, everybody. Stephen, how you doing? He's resilient. There you go, buddy.
I don't get this when I show up in class. But that's why I do that.
That's all right. Have a seat over there. Have a seat. Careful. All right. Have a seat. He's nervous. Everyone gets nervous here. Huh? You guys are... All right, Stephen.
Anyone want to change places?
How you doing?
He's good. I mean, what do you need me here?
Oh, stop. Come on.
He's good.
Stop,
He's
but go
really
on.
good.
Stop, but go on.
He's going to take over my classes. I teach at NYU. Anyone here from NYU? That's because they priced you all out.
There you go. This is the New York show.
Yeah.
All right. So, Professor Hahn, this here, I always like to start telling everybody, this ain't your grandma's interview show. These are going to be hard-hitting questions. So I don't know if you've ever done anything like this, but let's just get started, huh? Here we go. Number one. Question number one. You ready?
I'm ready.
That wasn't the question. We're having fun.
Yes, it was.
Look at us. We're having fun. Okay. So, how are you doing, first of all? How rude of me.
Well, until I fell down pretty well.
Hey, listen, I've done way worse.
Me too.
Oh, please tell us about that. No,
at the end.
Here we go. Okay. So your book, first of all, incredible book. Very,
you.
very great book. What I thought was so great, you said, I have seen other interviews that you've done as well. Not as good as this one. Okay.
And this will be shorter.
Yes, this will be shorter. Here we go. But your book, you dedicated yourself to basically telling the story of the enslaved people in the South all the way through, before the Civil War, through the Civil War, through Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, and through the Great Migration, but you tell it from the ground level. Right. What's going on among the different families, among the different plantations, among the different cities and states. It's really incredible because you basically humanize what until I guess most of us realize in the history we read is we've always thought of slavery as something that was done to a people and that people suffered and that's it. And there's almost like a pawn. But the people were very active, they did lots of things and they helped bring about the end of slavery, more importantly. But before we get into all that, how did you decide to dedicate yourself to studying that?
Well, that's a question. When I was a college student, I was a political activist, which is what got me into history. And through my political activities, I ended up meeting history grad students who said, you should... I was trying to make sense out of what was going on around me, and they sort of pointed me to a number of people in the history department who, as it turns out, were doing really pioneering work in African-American history and on the history of slavery. This was quite a long time ago, and I kind of got hooked. And so I went to graduate school, and I was interested in the South, in the 19th century mostly, and I was interested in humble people, white and black ones. In fact, the first book I wrote was on humble white people. But when I was a graduate student, I was doing a paper, and I was reading these old records of the immediate post-emancipation, post-Civil War period. Just after African-American men got the elective franchise. And I read these reports, complaints about these black men and women who were walking 25 miles to political meetings in the face of double-barrel shotguns. And I'm writing from a point of view where, half the population doesn't even bother to turn out to vote. And I thought there was nothing in my education in history or anything else that prepared me for this. And so I thought, this is a big story. It's about what happened before, and it's what happened after. And 15 years later, I finished.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. 15 years it took you to write the book. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And another 15 to read it.
Yeah.
15 for you to read it.
Yeah. Well, what you were saying is actually interesting because from reading the book, there are stories in there. I mean, literally groups of former enslaved people would meet. 100. They meet together the night before, and they'd spend the night and basically wake up crack of dawn, so they avoid the crowds, and they would go together to protect each other. Because they were literally risking their lives just going to the polling places.
They knew
they were given the
they
right.
knew if they went individually,
Yeah.
they would be prevented from voting. They probably would be either harassed or killed. And the only way to do it was, exactly as you said, the night before, they kind of camp out in groups of 15, 20. They knew when, they could go when there probably wouldn't be many other white people there. That's when they went to vote. And the turnout rate was like 80 or 90%.
Crazy. Yeah.
Amazing.
And that's here in New York where to get people to vote, they have to give you stickers. And people were doing that that's crazy, man.
No one wanted stickers then because it would be targets.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was not good. It was and that got worse. But but getting to that, actually, so I mentioned this in the I guess the lecture, we'll call it that, it's a very liberal use of the word lecture, but
it was better than the ones I give.
Oh, stop. Come on. Stop.
Well, you asked me to do that.
Yeah, that's true. Not here. Hello. Okay. All right, so the Great Migration. I think this is such a fascinating chapter in American history. I mean, people don't realize that from the early 1900s to the 1970s, there's almost like over 6 million African Americans migrate from the Southeast to the rest of the country. I mean, cities as we know them, inner cities, urban, everything we know from cities changed with this phenomena. And you talk about this, but in your book, you talk about how the decades of oppression before it are what led to it. And it wasn't just people escaping something. It was a conscious decision. It was something that was enabled by social networks and a way of thinking politically, economically, et cetera. Could you talk a little bit more about this? But not too much.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty good.
I think the map you saw up there is a really good representation of what happens. It begins in the early 20th century. By the 1930s, about 1.5 million African Americans who had been in the South, and up until that point, over 90% of the black population lived in the South. It kind of gets cut off in the 1930s because of the Depression. It resumes again during World War II and immediately after into the 1960s. I think there are at least a couple of things that are really important. One, and I think you suggested that, is that it really transforms the political map of the United States. At that point, African Americans who were in the South were disfranchised. They had gotten the right to vote, and by the end of the 19th century, it was taken away from them. They could not vote, but when they got to the northern states, and especially northern cities, they could. It's not that they didn't face racial discrimination, redlining, one of many, many ways in which this happened, but they could vote. And this meant that by the 1930s, they were really able to push the Democratic Party in a much more social democratic direction than had been the case before. And they were really the foundation of the transformation of modern American politics. The other thing that's so interesting is that it was kind of a cultural transmission belt. You think about people like Louis Armstrong, who, the great jazz trumpeter, starts in New Orleans, goes to Chicago, goes to New York. You think about Muddy Waters or B.B. King, Delta bluesmen, who start in the Mississippi Delta, end up in places like Memphis or maybe St. Louis, then to Chicago, then to New York. Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey. In a sense, it lays the groundwork for rock and roll, modern American music. And one of the things I have always thought that's so fascinating about this is we kind of think about the Deep South in this period as incredibly backward. But this is where the most modern cultural forms are being generated. Jazz, blues, and a little bit up the Mississippi River, William Faulkner. So no one's ever really written about this. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned, Florida also. They were the word jukebox. That comes from Florida. juking. That was like these towns outside where a lot of African Americans lived. That was the juke houses. They would go and they would hang out, and that was what it was called. It's called juking, and that's where jukebox came from. All these different things. Authors came up. The Harlem Renaissance hosted a lot of artists from that. So it's very important. So I wanted to spin off here from this, what you're talking about. So in the book, you also mentioned, and this is, I think, an interesting point. You mentioned emigrationism. In the late 1800s, there was a movement to move back to Africa, to Liberia. This also was picked up later on by Marcus Garvey. If you guys know what that name is, and also it moved to Kansas as well, another place that people had their eyes set on. At that time, it didn't take off as much as it eventually did with, let's say, during the Great Migration. But what I thought was interesting, and I think is important to note, as with any social movement that doesn't have the numbers that impress people, is that it still played a huge role, as did Garveyism later on, which even though that didn't have the huge numbers as well. And I think this is an important way to think of any social movement. It's not about how many people you convert that day. It's not about how many actual rights or laws get passed that day as well. I think just the actual movement itself can serve a purpose. I was hoping you could talk about that.
Yeah, when I was researching Nation Under Our Feet, I really didn't know very much about this and didn't think it was especially important. And then, one of the things about sort of history is like you're constantly discovering new things, learning new things. I mean, I know most people had miserable high school history educations, which is why people like me love to teach the survey course, because the students come in and their expectations are incredibly low, and all you need is a pulse to impress them.
Where do I sign up for that?
And if you have more than a pulse, it's really good. I stumbled upon it. I was going to the Library of Congress looking for something, and all of a sudden I got into a set of records, and I found that there were hundreds of letters being written from the most remote parts of the rural South to what was then called the American Colonization Society, from people who wanted out. They had already endured enslavement. They had some optimism during Reconstruction when the franchise was extended, and at that point, a pretty progressive Republican Party, it's hard to believe, was in power, and Reconstruction was defeated, and they recognized that there was not much of a future for themselves, that was not about poverty, that was not about no opportunities for their children, and so they were looking for ways to leave. It was very hard to do. You needed resources. They had signed long-term contracts, and so, as Tom suggested, it's sort of this interesting balance between what your sort of sensibilities are. You want out. You want to reconstitute your communities. You want to be able to provide for yourself. You want to govern yourself and your lives. And if you can do it, you'll go. But very few of them, relatively speaking, were able to go. But I also found out that this was a kind of nourishing ground for Garvey's movement in the 20th century, which I should say is to this day still the largest movement of people of African descent ever. There were millions of people in the South and around the world, and it wasn't simply about leaving the South or going back to Africa. It was about a black empowerment movement, and not surprisingly, Malcolm X's father was in the UNIA. Rosa Parks was in the UNIA. I mean, there's enormous influence. So it kind of changed the way in which I was thinking about a lot of the things I was researching and writing.
Well, I think that word kind of sums it up. I say empowerment. I think just participating and doing anything along those lines empowers you. And I think that is one of the things that people look over and overlook in any movement, especially today where it feels so hopeless in lots of ways. Just showing up isn't going to change everything, but it is going to change you. And it's going to change the people around you. And then later on, things can change. And, progress is always piecemeal. I guess the status quo always looks like it wins, really. But yeah, until it doesn't. And I guess that's what one of the words I thought I'd point out. Sorry to step on you there, Professor. Didn't maybe, just
sorry to fall on your stage.
You don't got to apologize to me. Don't worry. All right, cool. I saw another interview that you did online. Not as good as this one. Okay. Anyways, in it you said both sides during the Civil War, both sides wanted to avoid slavery, and enslaved brought it to the forefront. So I thought that was very interesting, especially with the conception most of us have of the Civil War and of the issue of slavery. Could you I guess expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, look, the Civil War was started as a rebellion of slaveholders against the authority of the federal government, and it went into a war because the federal government decided that this was not acceptable. But when the war started, neither side actually wanted to see slaves or slavery in the middle of it. They thought it would be too distracting given their own political goals. The political goals of the Lincoln administration were to put down the rebellion and reunite the country if possible. The goals of the enslavers and their, as Lincoln put it, so-called Confederacy was to establish their political independence. And 40% of the population of their states was enslaved. And this was a potential military problem. So the idea was to avoid it. Lincoln basically said, if the slaves rose up in rebellion, you've got to put it down militarily. But what happened, and this is kind of an interesting example of what happens in history, the people who best understand what's going on are often the people who are on the outside, the people who don't seem to have power. And so it was the enslaved people who, in their mind, assumed that this was a war about slavery, that Lincoln was their ally, and when they heard that the Union Army was moving into a territory nearby, they decided to act. They got up, they left their plantations and farms, they effectively rebelled against the authority of their owners, even if their owners threatened to kill them. And little by little, they went to Union lines and forced the Union side to come up with some kind of plan. It took a long time. Eventually, not only did it move the government toward emancipation, but by the end of the war, 200,000 people of African descent, about 150,000 of whom started the war as slaves, were in the Union Army. And so they were armed, defeating their former owners. And it's really one of the most, it's one of these things where sort of an imagined sense of what history is about is turned into reality by the people whose interests are most significant. And for me, this was part of what was so incredibly inspiring about history. It was about ordinary people, repressed people, exploited people who empowered themselves, who decided to change the world. And mostly when that happens, they lose. But not this time. They won. And it made an enormous difference.
Sorry, I was about to start crying there. Good Lord, that was really good. That was pretty awesome, man.
Listen, as you can imagine, you read all this stuff, and a lot of it is pretty brutal, and a lot of it is pretty depressing. And then you read some of this stuff. You can't beat it.
No, that's great. It's nice to see you get excited like that, Professor. Good Lord. That was, I was about to just jump up and run out the door for some reason. I don't even know where I was going. I was like, all right, let's go.
That's because of what goes on in the green room before we come out. That's what they told me when I would come in. They would fortify me.
Which green room were you in?
Yeah, right.
Huh? All right, one more thing before I go to the next part of this interview, real quick if you can. So you talk about in the book paramilitary politics. I thought this was an interesting a part of your book. And you talk about, like, so the KKK is one of many groups, actually, that were active at this time in the late 1800s, et cetera, trying to basically take back some of the rights they had gained during Reconstruction, et cetera. Now, real quick, I guess, this is with a visible face, I guess, of the kind of enforcement arm of a system, right? We think that it's just a bunch of racists running out, and they are. But it's more than that. It's actually the enforcement of a system that's already in place. And I thought this was interesting, I guess, when you think of like other authors and people who've written on this. Frantz Fanon, who talks about colonialism. Ruth Wilson Gilmore she's a teacher at CUNY. She has a great quote. She says, "Capitalism requires inequality. Racism enshrines it." I was wondering if you could talk to this idea of not just slavery, but I guess race as it's used, and not just with African Americans, but all over the world in different, colors and stripes, how it's used as part of a system, and if you think this is a better way to think about it.
Well, race is a historical subject and relationship and system. It changes over time, but it always has a powerful mechanisms of enforcement. In the immediate post-Civil War period, the only people who were utterly committed to practicing politics in a democratic way were former slaves. Their former owners were committed to preventing them from acting in the political system, from the legitimacy of their political status and civil status, and as by any means necessary, put it down. And that the federal government allowed this to happen. It's another case in which the national government was a collaborator right from the beginning. Anyone who argues that the country is not, as a country, racist has a lot of things to explain. And this was a point at which the federal government could have made a difference. They could have left their army. They could have enabled former slaves to participate in state militias so that they could protect themselves. They did not. And they basically turned over the South to whites who had been in power before, or new groups who were seeking power then. And then, by the end of the century, segregation, disfranchisement, which is accepted on a national level. Plessy v. Ferguson basically says that segregation does not violate the 13th or 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the Equal Protection Law. Williams versus Mississippi in 1898 says it's okay to disfranchise people on the basis of, not necessarily, on the basis, they couldn't do it explicitly on the basis of race, so it was poll taxes and literacy requirements and registration laws. That was okay. Woodrow Wilson segregated the federal bureaucracy. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and I think what you just described too is what the system would be adapting. You still keep people down, but you just adapt and you do it in a different way, and it continues to this day. It's not as overt as slavery.
Yeah, it was basically being modernized.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Frantz Fanon quote where he says, "Racism no longer dares show itself without a disguise." And I think that's kind of where we're
sort of where we are now.
Yeah, sort of where we are right now. Okay, on a lighter note, we got to keep it moving here. All right, so we're going to do a little thing here I like to call rapid fire questions. There's us. Our faces are on fire. I messed up the graphic, but let's do this. All right, we got a few minutes here. I want to get some lighter questions. Going to ask you
I think I'm going to take a break at this point.
Don't you dare. Right. Okay. Here we go. Let's get through with this. All right. I like asking every one of my guests this. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen in New York?
Well, anyone who's from New York knows that that's a kind of crazy question, right? I think, when was the last time I was on the subway? A couple of days ago. I got to say that in some ways, the craziest moments I can remember having was in the early days of the pandemic. And
I thought you were going to say disco.
No.
All right.
And you go out in the street and nobody's there.
Yeah, it was wild.
I mean, this is a 24/7 city. That's what it's all about. There's no city in the world like this. And you go out in the streets and nobody's there. And it hits you. It's not only about the statistics on the media. It's not about the ambulances that you can hear. It's about like a neutron bomb had been dropped, and all the buildings are there, but none of the people are there. And I have to say, it really, I wish I could give you a truly insane thing, but that was pretty insane.
Yeah, you're probably just thinking, finally, I got parking.
Right.
Wow.
No, it was great. It was great until they let the restaurants, have outdoor seating, and there all the parking went.
Nice. All right, let's keep it moving. All right, so who was your hero growing up?
Ooh.
Don't say one of your parents.
No, definitely not.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Why don't we talk about that?
When I was an adult, I had a 3-time zone rule. When I was growing up, I don't know. Probably, I was always interested in politics. I guess, when I was growing up, and this kind of situates me chronologically, I guess John F. Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
Partly because, he was he did sort of have an inspirational way, and there were good things, and unfortunately, he didn't live long enough for us to really end up hating him.
Wait, he's dead?
Right. It's unclear, but as far
Not
as we
the
know,
YouTube video I watched.
Yeah, right.
You got to do your research,
No,
Professor.
so until I was in college, probably, he was clearly, I don't know if I would call him a hero, but he was certainly someone I thought was exemplified kind of a political direction that might be good, and was interested in, encouraging young people to go out and, he organized the Peace Corps, which has its own issues, but at least, some of the intentions were pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer. Go, keep it moving. Here we go. What place in New York do you think best represents the city?
Ooh. Well, one place I really love is Washington Square Park.
Yeah, that's a good spot.
Now, part of it is that,
That's right.
there's no college
George Washington.
campus like NYU when, you have something like Washington Square Park as the campus. But it's this incredible kaleidoscope of people and stuff going on.
Yeah.
And, political, cultural, obviously,
Yeah.
retail. And I gotta say, I just love walking through it. I mean, there's an enormous range of ages there. People who have lived there for a long time. There's a kind of, I wouldn't call it community because, it's sort of hard to define exactly what that is. But I don't know. I mean, it's a good.
No, I understood why you liked it when you said retail. Don't worry, I get it, Professor. That's how you come up with a 400-page book.
I meant the guy who would write a poem for you.
Yeah, sure. All right, let's keep this moving. Here we go. Cats or dogs?
Ooh, that's easy, actually. Dogs.
No.
No, I understand. I mean, I've not been around cats. My sense is that people love dogs because they want to be loved, and you're not that vulnerable, right? I mean, you have to be a complete, idiot to have your dog not love you. Your dog doesn't reject you unless you don't feed the dog. And even if you don't feed the dog finds something to eat, right?
There's someone in the audience right now like, I just can't train my dog. It's not my fault.
So look, I'm an insecure person too, and you want love, and so cats. It strikes me. I've never had a cat. They're easier to take care of.
Sure.
And I'm a dog person. My son just got a chocolate lab puppy.
Oh wow.
Very cute.
Nice.
Very bigorate.
And you got it for your son?
No.
Oh, okay. You just found it?
No, he got it.
Oh, and it's a puppy. Oh, okay. I was about to say, if he found her, are you sure that's
No,
just
no,
not
no,
a rat?
No, I assure you.
Chocolate lab.
Yeah, right.
Look at this chocolate lab. It keeps going in my trash. I don't know why. Okay, let's keep this moving. All right, what would the title of your autobiography be?
Don't fall over.
How to fall up.
Watch for that step.
Stephen Hahn falling up.
Right, Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I know for certain is that I would never write an autobiography or a memoir. I'm not a great fan of memoirs. I don't know. The Overachiever?
The Overachiever. Oh, all right. You're not going to put the word Pulitzer Prize in there somewhere, huh?
No, that's in the subtitle.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we brought the Pulitzer Prize, so that begs a follow-up question. Do you think you're better than us?
You mean right now?
Yes.
No. Well.
I'm going to give you a chance to dig yourself
You
deeper.
invited me here because you said I was better than them. Not quite as good as you, but better than them.
Not in front of them.
Okay.
Okay, so would you say this show is a bigger honor than the Pulitzer Prize?
Oh, come on. It's an honor.
I'll take it. You said
serious.
yes.
Like, this is great. I don't know anybody in my line of work who was actually asked to do this and has not yet been booed off the stage. I emphasize yet.
All right. Well, one thing I actually, so you have your newest book here. We're going to plug your newest book. This is called. It's coming out soon. This is an advanced copy. Don't look at it too long. He'll get in trouble. It's called A Liberal America. I'm really excited to read this when it comes out. You want to explain it real quick what it is?
Well, it hasn't come out yet, so.
So you don't want to explain it?
It is actually a deep dive about what's going on now, and to suggest that what we're looking at has deep, deep, deep roots. This is not just a noxious weed that's popped up in a variety of places that we can pull out. And so this book actually starts in the 17th century and goes up to the near present. And it was very dispiriting to write because it was even more depressing than I thought it would be when I started it. And so it's a book in a lot of ways about what we're up against. But the hardest part of it was to write a conclusion because I didn't want it to be as dark as the rest of the book. And I didn't want to be Pollyannish about it, like, well, this is what's going on and this is how to fix it. Like, I have no idea how to fix it. I'm a historian, and it's hard enough to figure out what happened in the past, let alone to try to, find your way, navigate your way into the present and near future. But I think if you don't know what you're up against, you're really not in a position to define a better world for yourself.
Well, and there's hope also in knowing that we've been somewhere before. I think that's good.
There is, and I gotta say that I'm not very hopeful at the moment, and I have no idea what's going to happen over the next numbers of months, except to assume that it's not going to be good. But I do. No, I mean, but I gotta say that one of the great things about teaching in university is that while I get older, the students stay the same age. And so, it's mostly true.
That's a quote from Dazed and Confused. You know that?
Well, you have to get your material.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And I gotta say, that what I may feel hopeful about is their generation and older who are not in denial, who do imagine a better world for themselves and understand what we're facing, and I think have had experiences with a far wider range of people than older folks and those who are really making us very nervous. They imagine a world of more equality, of less hierarchy, of greater, tolerance, and I do think that that's what we can be hopeful.
That's good.
About.
I think that's a good note to leave on. Real quick question, just a yes or no question. This is the last one. Real quick. This is the most important question of the night.
Is what?
This is the most important question. Will you be my friend?
Yes.
All right, and we're gonna wrap up here, but before we wrap up, I know that you won the Pulitzer Prize, and it's a really impressive thing, so I actually thought I'd give you a prize as well. I'm giving you the inaugural Tom D. Award for history. This is presented to you. Please stand.
Well, I need a picture.
There you go. There's your prize. It's gonna be as big as the Pulitzer one day. Well, thank you so much, Professor Hahn. I can take that mic from you.
Thank you. Let me see if I can get off.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'll take that from you. Thank you very much. Guys, give it up for Professor Hahn.